Yesterday, I fed a hungry albino dwarf dragon, and today, he brought me 3 poor babies. Beginning, the desert winds of Erido's prime howled against the hull of my shack. They carried with them the scent of scorched metal and dry stone, a reminder that nothing grew easily on this world. I had been living here for 3 years, eking out a living as a salvager on the edge of the abandoned mining fields. Every morning I trekked through the skeletal remains of rusting machinery, broken crawlers, and collapsed dig sites, searching for scrap worth melting down or wiring I could patch into something useful. Life was lonely. I'd once been an engineer aboard the exploration fleet of Consortium, but politics and betrayal had stripped me of my position. They left me marooned here with nothing but a modified crawler, a set of tools, and a will to survive. It was during one of these foraging runs that I met him. He was small, barely waist high, yet every instinct in me screamed danger. The creature's scales were ghostly white, like polished ivory, and faint blue veins shimmered beneath them. He had stubby wings folded awkwardly against his body, as though they'd never fully developed, and his eyes glowed the same pale sapphire as the twin suns overhead. A dwarf dragon. I had heard the stories whisper across comm channels. Genetically engineered remnants of the old Dominion's bioweapon projects, bred to survive in the harshest worlds. Most were said to be feral and hostile, capable of reducing a scavenger's camp to ash. And yet this one, he looked starved. His ribs protruded. His talons trembled as he clawed at a discarded ration wrapper I'd thrown aside earlier. For a moment, we just stared at each other. His throat pulsed with a faint hum, not quite a growl, not quite a plea. Against every survival instinct I had, I reached into my satchel and pulled out half a dry protein loaf. Here, I said, tossing it gently toward him. He pounced, devouring the food in seconds, his tongue flicking across the sand for crumbs. When he looked back up at me, his eyes weren't filled with rage or animal hunger anymore. They held recognition, gratitude. I didn't know it then, but that simple act of kindness would change everything. The next day, I was repairing a fractured water condenser outside my shack when I heard scratching. Not the usual scraping of sand against metal, but a deliberate, rhythmic sound. When I turned, my heart nearly stopped. The albino dwarf dragon had returned. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him waddled 3 tiny forms. Hatchlings, their scales a patchwork of pale gray and faint lavender. Their wings were smaller than his, their bodies frail, their eyes clouded with malnutrition. The largest barely reached my knee. The smallest could have fit into my tool satchel. The dragon nudged them forward with his snout, then sat back on his haunches, staring at me expectantly. "You brought me your kids?" I muttered, stunned. The hatchlings squeaked, their voices like broken flutes. They sniffed at the sand, then at me, before collapsing in exhaustion. It was clear they hadn't eaten in days. I sighed, running a hand down my face. I can barely feed myself, you know. But the albino dragon didn't move. His eyes never left mine, glowing with quiet intensity. Somehow, he was asking, not demanding, not threatening, but asking for me to help them. Against all logic, I gave in. That night, I shared the last of my dried rations with the hatchlings, breaking the bars into tiny crumbs they could swallow. They devoured them greedily, their weak tails twitching in delight. The albino dragon didn't eat, not a bite. He only watched them, as though making sure they were safe under my care. I realized something profound. He trusted me with his family. Over the following weeks, my life changed. The hatchlings, whom I named Ash, Lumen, and Pebble, quickly filled my shack with noise and chaos. They nipped at my tools, gnawed on wiring, and curled up together in the warmth of my heat lamp. Ash, the largest, had a bold streak, always climbing atop the table to observe whatever project I was working on. Lumen, the middle one, was quiet, her pale lavender scales glowing faintly in the dark. Pebble, the runt, tripped over his own tail but had a stubborn determination that made me smile despite myself. Feeding them was a challenge. My rations dwindled quickly, forcing me to make riskier salvage runs into territory once patrolled by mining automatons, many now derelict, some still partially active and dangerously unstable. I scavenged nutrient paste from old storage depots, hunted desert vermin with a cobbled-together harpoon gun, and even learned that the dragons could digest the marrow of certain fossilized creatures buried beneath the sands. The albino dragon, whom I started calling Ghost, helped at night. He would vanish into the dunes and return with scavenged carcasses, dried lizards, or cracked mineral shells. He always dropped them at the hatchling's feet before retreating into the shadows. Though he rarely entered my shack, he lingered nearby, a silent guardian. Slowly, a bond formed, but with a bond came danger. One evening, while I was repairing a circuit panel, a shadow passed across the sands. A surveillance drone, Consortium make, its black carapace glinting in the sun. My breath caught. The Consortium had abandoned Erido's prime decades ago, but if their drones were here, it meant something had drawn them back. The drone paused over my shack, scanning, and then its sensors locked onto the hatchlings. It hovered lower, mechanical claws twitching. Ghost roared, a sound that shook the sand itself. He launched upward, slamming into the drone with a fury I hadn't thought his small frame capable of. Metal screeched as his claws tore through the drone's casing, sparks raining down. With one final bite, he ripped free its optic core, and the machine fell lifeless into the dust. The hatchlings squealed in terror, but Ghost landed between them in a wreck, wings flared, chest heaving. When he turned to me, blood and oil dripping from his fangs, I knew the truth. The consortium hadn't forgotten their creations, and now they knew where at least some of them still lived. Rising conflict. From that day on, we were hunted. First came more drones. Larger, faster, armed with stun pulses meant to capture rather than kill. Then came ground patrols. Armor crawlers carrying mercenaries hired to recover assets of genetic significance. I had no illusions. To Consortium, Ghost and his hatchlings weren't lives. They were property. Experiments. Weapons waiting to be exploited again. We fled deeper into the wastes. My shack was abandoned, its walls caving in under the assault of a drone strike. I packed what little I could onto my crawler. The hatchlings huddled beneath thermal blankets while Ghost scouted ahead. Days turned into weeks. We moved from canyon to canyon, scavenging old mining tunnels for shelter. The hatchlings grew stronger. Ash's wings finally unfurled enough to glide short distances. Lumen learned to produce faint bursts of phosphorescent flame, and Pebble, despite his size, developed razor-sharp claws perfect for breaking open mineral shells. Ghost never left their side. I began to understand why he had brought them to me. He wasn't just seeking food. He was seeking an ally. He knew he couldn't protect them alone, and I had become part of his family. But the consortium was relentless. One night, under the cold starlight, we were ambushed in a ravine. A crawler convoy surrounded us, floodlights blazing. Nets of electric charge crackled through the air, ensnaring the hatchlings. They screamed in pain, collapsing against the sand. Ghost lunged, ripping through armored plating. But even he faltered under the barrage. A stun round struck him in the side, sending him crashing to the ground. No! I shouted, diving to the hatchlings. Sparks burned my hands as I tore at the nets, my tools useless against consortium tech. Soldiers advanced, rifles raised, and then something inside me snapped. I had been an engineer once, but more than that, I had been a fighter. I remember how to reroute power, how to overload systems. Scrambling to the nearest crawler, I jammed my salvage plasma cutter into its intake port and reversed the polarity. The vehicle erupted in a chain reaction of fire and smoke, the shockwave blasting soldiers off their feet. The nets flickered, failing for just a moment, long enough for the hatchlings to break free. Ash exhaled his first true burst of flame, scorching a soldier's armor. Lumen's glow flared blindingly bright, disorienting the attackers. Pebble leapt onto a mercenary's face, claws sinking deep. Ghost rose, staggering but defiant, and with a roar that split the heavens, he breathed a torrent of white-blue fire that consumed the remaining crawlers. When the smoke cleared, silence reigned. We had survived, but barely. Ending. After the battle, I knew the truth. We couldn't keep running. The consortium would never stop. As long as Ghost and his hatchlings lived, they would be hunted, cataloged, dissected. So I made a decision. There was one place on Eridos Prime they would never follow. The Storm Vault, an ancient Dominion bunker buried beneath the glass dunes. Legend said it housed technologies too dangerous even for the warlords who created the dragons. Most scavengers avoided it, fearful of its automated defenses and unpredictable energy fields. But I wasn't most scavengers. It took us a week to reach it, the journey grueling. Ghost bore scars from our battles. The hatchlings clung close, and I drove the crawler until its engine screamed. When at last we arrived, the dunes shimmered like molten glass under the suns, and there, half buried, was the jagged mouth of the vault. Inside, the air was still, humming with dormant power. Security systems, long dead, flickered to life at our presence. But Ghost's roar silenced them. It was as if the vault recognized its kin. We found chambers filled with crystalline tanks, remnants of genetic splicing equipment, data cores humming faintly with forgotten knowledge. And in the central hall, a geothermal chamber warm enough for dragons to nest, hidden from consortium eyes. It was a sanctuary. I helped the hatchlings settle there, teaching them how to feed off mineral deposits and thermal vents. Ghost curled protectively around them, his pale eyes finally soft with relief. As for me, I chose to stay, not because I had no other choice, but because I found something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose, family, belonging. The consortium would keep searching, yes, but they would not find us here. And even if they did, they would face not just dragons, but me, too. Yesterday, I fed a starving albino dwarf dragon. Today, he brought me his babies. Tomorrow, together, we will rewrite what it means to survive.